What's one of the most demoralizing and frustrating experiences in language learning? It's when you understand almost everything, but the moment you have to speak, your brain just freezes. Your mind goes blank, and even the simplest words disappear. Sound familiar? If it does, this video is definitely for you. I'm Luca Lampariello, language coach, entrepreneur, and someone who's been learning, speaking, and maintaining 14 languages over the last 34 years. And let me tell you, I face this problem in every single foreign language I've learned. Recently, I came across yet another brilliant video by Till Mussoff, the founder of Lingua, where he tackles this exact issue with his usual razor-sharp practical insight. His take unlocks one of the biggest mindset shifts you can make as a language learner, especially if you're stuck in the I understand but can't speak phase. Curious to know what that shift is? Before we dive in, just a quick heads up. If you're serious about improving your speaking skills big time, I've created a free guide for you called 3 Simple Steps to Maximize Your Conversations with AI. You will find the link in the pinned comment and in the description box below. Now, grab a tea, a notebook, or just hit play while you're on a walk. Let's break this down.
You understand everything, but are unable to speak. It's a frustrating, yet very common stage in language learning. You've put in hundreds of hours, you follow conversations perfectly, you binge-watch shows without subtitles. And yet when the moment comes to speak and the question is not a super basic one, you struggle. In this video we break down why this happens to almost everyone, why speaking anxiety can be a huge factor, and more importantly, how to finally bridge that gap from understanding to speaking. And no, I won't tell you to just get out there, be social, and practice. We look at lots of strategies that work even if you're not naturally outgoing.
So, first of all, great introduction as always, Till hits the nail on the head. Because this is a very common problem. It doesn't matter who you are, it doesn't matter your language experience. Every single time that you learn a language or another language, then you will stumble upon this problem. You get a lot of input, which to me is really a necessary part of language learning. It's the big cake, as I call it, using this cake metaphor. But then, all the input in the world will not make a difference if you don't start speaking. And when you start speaking, you will find it difficult. This is a fact of life. That's the way the cookie crumbles, as they say. And let's see what Till has to say about this.
Let me start by sharing my own experience with this. I understand spoken and written Spanish at a B2 C1 level, meaning I can follow almost any conversation, even at high speeds, watch movies and read books quite comfortably. But my speaking, not that great yet. I would call myself functionally conversational in most situations, but when it comes to more complex thoughts, I do struggle. However, I'm not stressing over this, as I know that this gap between understanding and speaking is something completely natural.
So 2 things about this. The first thing is that Till's experience is perfectly normal. He's experiencing this with Spanish. I'm experiencing this with Turkish. I think I have an A2 level. And I started speaking. The experience was rewarding, but at the same time, it was also sobering in the sense that after a year and a half of input, then speaking, even introducing yourself was still difficult. But, and this leads to the second point, if you are aware of that, if you're aware that input that does not translate automatically into super fluent output, then it's totally fine. The only thing is that you have to be aware of this thing, and then you don't have to stress about it. This, once again, happened across the range of languages that I've been learning over the last 34 years. And recently, for example, it happened in Hungarian. I still am frustrated about my Hungarian because I've been learning it for quite a long time. I can understand a lot. But then when it comes to speaking, I still have a hard time expressing myself as I would like to. Fact of life. Don't worry about it. Be aware of it. Don't stress about it. But then you need a system.
Think about how babies learn their first language. They understand way more than they can say for a long time. They go through what's called a silent period, absorbing the language for many months before they start speaking. And when they do start speaking, it's definitely not perfect from the start and by no means complex. But
it's interesting to think about it that a lot of adults expect to speak a language fluently after 2 or 3 months of learning it. And truth be told, this is quite difficult to do unless it's a very, very similar language. Let's say you're Italian, you have a lot of experience and you've been learning Spanish or Catalan or French, then it's possible to start speaking. But the reality is for most other languages, this is quite difficult to do. I always advise you get a lot of input, and that can last up to 2 or even 3 years, depending on whether the language is really, really distant, and that's totally fine. And the other point is that adults, when they start speaking, which adds to another layer of frustration, is the fact that we want to express ourselves in a very refined way, but we don't have the tools for that. Think about how a child starts speaking. After 2 or 3 years, they start mumbling and blabbering things like mama, and then they say maybe I want this, I want that, and then they just build upon that. While adults, they have already this layer of our own native language or other languages, if you speak more languages, and then we want to say very refined things, and then once again we don't have the means to do so, and then we get stuck and we get frustrated. So it's important to keep that in mind and always have this perspective that language learning takes time, especially because we're talking about language acquisition, which is a subconscious process, and the only sane and great thing you can do as a foundation is to get a lot of input. Then you can transform that input into output. But this is important when you think about, I want to speak as fast as possible. Think about children who it takes them a long time to first absorb the language, their own native language, and then speak it.
Why is speaking that much harder? When you're listening or reading, your brain is doing pattern recognition, matching what you hear or see with patterns you've stored through exposure. But when you're speaking, your brain needs to form the thought you want to express while finding the right words and grammar patterns, coordinating multiple language systems simultaneously, monitoring your own output, and processing the other person's reactions.
There's a lot to unpack there, and I also want to add the fact that if the language has a different syntactical structure, like for example Japanese or Turkish, me being Italian, having Italian as my native language, then it adds up a layer of difficulty, because you have to think about the words, and then you have to think about the structure. You have to reassemble them to form meaning. And I remember that I was completely overwhelmed when I tried to speak Japanese. After maybe a year and a half of input, I tried to express myself in an eloquent way, going back to the previous point, and then just to realize that I really had to simplify my sentences to the bone as much as I could in order to first think in the target language subconsciously and then speak. I have a video which is all about thinking in your target language. You can find it somewhere here. But the bottom line is, it takes time, and then it takes time to speak a language. You need a lot of input, but then when it comes to speaking, you have to know how to approach it. If you want to jump the gun, so to speak, and try to speak in a very elegant way from the get-go, especially with difficult or distant languages, good luck with that.
All this in real time. The difference between understanding and speaking is like the difference between recognizing a song and being able to perform it. You might instantly know a song when you hear it, but playing it on an instrument requires coordinating multiple skills at once. That's also why you find yourself speaking better when you're discussing familiar topics.
This is a very great point. It's a very good point that you can just look at someone performing, like look at someone who, I don't know, he's skiing or playing soccer, swimming, he has acquired an ability. Observing him doesn't make you a good performer. You have to practice. This is once again, a fact of life. We learn well, we acquire knowledge, but most of all, we acquire skills when we apply that knowledge, when we do things in practice. And in language learning, this is a very sobering lesson. When you read, just to give an idea, when you read a podcast or you listen to a podcast, something very simple that you can do is to talk to yourself about the podcast in order to internalize words. We'll probably see some advice in this regard a little bit later in the video, but think about activation as a form of practice. You want to transform what he calls knowledge, what Till calls knowledge here, into a skill. So there's many creative ways in which you can move from knowledge or a certain set of skills like listening and reading into speaking and writing and output skills.
Your brain has created stronger neural pathways for these specific contexts. You can think of it a bit like knowledge and skill. I'm not 100% happy with the differentiation, but let's go with it for a bit.
Now, before we continue, I would like to say that I also use the concept of knowledge and skill, but the reality is that listening and reading are sub-skills in and of themselves, because being able to read fluently, being able to listen and understand, so listening comprehension, these are sub-skills that get managed in a certain area of your brain, and speaking is another sub-skill, speaking and writing. These are all sub-skills that exist and operate within the bigger skill of, being able to speak a language. Because we use the term being able to speak a language, but we can call it the skill of knowing, speaking, using a language, etc., etc.
Understanding a language is knowledge. You've built up a mental database of words, patterns, and rules through input. But speaking is a skill. And like any skill, whether it's playing an instrument or riding a bike, it requires a different kind of practice than just acquiring knowledge.
Here's a little bit of there's a little bit of a terminology dilemma. I think that reading and, listening, input in general is also a skill, sub-skills within the bigger picture of acquiring a language.
Is the application of your knowledge. This is actually why I built Langia with a gradual approach to output. You start with lots of tailor-made input through stories and articles for your level and interests. Then move to assisted writing, where you can mix languages, and finally to more complex output, all while reducing the cognitive load, so you can focus on one aspect at a time. But before we dive into...
Langia is great. I've been using it for Turkish and not only for Turkish. I have an affiliate link. I've started working with Till. I think this tool is absolutely fantastic because it packages everything. There's input, but there's also very creative ways to create output from that input. And I think it's really important to highlight the power of the bridge. I call it the language bridge. How do you move from input into output? There's many creative ways. This is a very simple, concise, and effective way of packaging all that, what I call the bridge activation, into one cool tool.
To how to develop this skill, we need to talk about what's holding most people back, including myself. Speaking anxiety. It's probably the biggest obstacle for most language learners. And it's completely normal. You're putting yourself in a vulnerable position, trying to express yourself with limited tools, potentially making mistakes in front of others. Even if you know the language well, this pressure can make your mind go blank.
This is absolutely true, and it's not talked about at school. In general, what normally happens is that we feel under pressure psychologically. That is the reason why I feel this anxiety. And when the anxiety is high, the problem is that it hampers, it keeps your brain, a part of your brain keeps and hampers another part of your brain from performing well. Normally we use, for example, the prefrontal cortex to grab words and organize them. And when we still don't speak that language well, this is mainly managed and handled by the prefrontal cortex. While when we speak a language fluently, it's handled by another part, which is called the basal ganglia. That's why it feels natural and feels like, okay, I'm speaking fluently. I'm not even thinking about the words. And in this vulnerable position, when you're anxious, it gets in the way because the entire limbic system is fighting against your prefrontal cortex, and then it's difficult to speak. So you actually can speak the language, but then it's difficult to express yourself. And in particular, it's a very interesting thing that happened recently. We had a Zoom meeting within my academy where we have a meeting with our students, and one of them told us that he's been learning German for quite some time. He understands everything, and he told us to me and to the other students that he managed to have great, smooth conversations, or at least fine conversations with one tutor, but when he met with another guy, a professor, who was also a German speaker, but not a native German speaker, he was just a German learner who had a very high level, he was intimidated. So if you think about it, the anxiety comes from internal pressure, but also external pressure. Think about when you operate within an environment, when there's another, German learner or someone who's learning your own target language speaks better than you, and you feel intimidated. This is just to show that there's a lot of factors to have to do with speaking. It's not just linguistic, the amount of words you know, the amount of sentences, the vocabulary, but also this immense pressure that we feel in ourselves and coming from the external environment.
When asked what aspects of foreign language classes are the most anxiety-provoking, students put talking at the top of the list. And speaking has been found to be the most anxiety-provoking form of communication. Low anxiety is correlated with more success in language education. And that's what we should be aiming for. So
that's absolutely correct. If your anxiety is low, then your success or your capacity of expressing yourself, of learning, of staying motivated is without a doubt higher. Unfortunately, within a lot of environments, anxiety is high. The pressure is high, and as a consequence, anxiety is also high. For example, in a classroom, not necessarily, but it happens. It happened to me at school, back in middle school, and it happens nowadays to a lot of people.
There's also common advice to just be social and to get out there, go out there, talk to natives is maybe not as productive as we are made to believe. And while I get it, I mean, the point of language is communication, to communicate with others, I actually see this differently. Not all of us are outgoing, especially not all the time.
This is a very important point. Not all of us are outgoing, and not all the time. Some people consider me, for example, an outgoing guy because I make YouTube videos, because I talk to a lot of people and I speak a bunch of languages. But the reality is, in certain contexts, I'm also an introvert. I can also be an introvert, and sometimes I just don't feel like speaking, especially if I don't speak the language at a decent level. And this reminds me of the big difference between me and another polyglot, Richard Simcott, who speaks a bunch of languages. Most of you already know him as one of the best polyglots in the world. And the thing that strikes me about Richard and me is that when it comes to speaking a foreign language, Richard tries to speak from the get-go, from day one. He learns a couple of sentences, he uses them immediately. I remember I was in Poznan in 2011, and he had been learning Polish maybe for 2-3 weeks. And I saw him interact with people, talking in shops, asking things, even if he was by no means fluent in the language, but he was using it. Well, I have to spend at least a couple of years before starting speaking. And when I have to, I feel a little bit of anxiety, feel a little bit of pressure. This comes maybe from the fact that I'm kind of a perfectionist, and also comes from my family heritage, especially from my father, who always wanted me to be the best of the best. He always wanted me to do as best as I could. So there's a lot of factors. Everybody is different. And, when you hear this piece of advice, go out there and just speak the language, it does not work this way for a lot of people.
Honestly, you don't need to speak a language at all if you don't want to. If you learn Korean because all you want to do is binge K-dramas all day, that's a perfectly valid way to use the language. Listening and reading are ways of using the language.
That's a great point. If you don't want to speak the language, it's totally fine. And this reminds me of Steve Kaufman, another big polyglot, who says, I learn a language because I learned a language, or I learned multiple languages because I like those languages. I like reading books, history books in those languages. I like doing stuff in those languages. And when it comes to speaking, if I have the chance of speaking, I will speak. But this is not the number one priority for Steve, and I completely understand. So if you want to understand movies, if you want to enjoy literature, or you want to use the language in meaningful ways for you, then that's great. It doesn't necessarily mean speaking a language fluently. Although generally, when we talk about language learning, most people, I guess, want to also be able to speak the language, to communicate in the language. But it does not have to be the number one priority, because everybody is different and everybody's got different objectives and goals.
And that's why I find this distinction between knowledge and skill to be somewhat imperfect. But if you do want to speak, and let's be real, most of us eventually want to do that, we should be strategic about it. Getting to that point does not have to be about forcing yourself into uncomfortable situations. If you get a kick out of that, you can do that though. The big idea is to build confidence gradually in more secure, less vulnerable environments. I've mentioned before that This is
another great point, and I would like to add the fact that you were not born confident. You build confidence by doing things, by getting out of your comfort zone, right? So if you feel like, okay, I'm not confident, I'm scared, well, the only way to gain more confidence is to do something. Think about when you're scared of doing something, you finally do it, and then you realize it was not a big deal, and you feel a great relief. This is how you build confidence. I think the fluency is a measure of confidence. It's one of the many perspectives from which you can, look at the concept of fluency. It's not just, of course, the amount of words that you know, the amount of sentences, but it's also the level of confidence and the level at ease that you feel when you interact and communicate with other people. And in order to build that confidence, you have to get out there there and expose yourself to situations, to multiple situations, and you have to mess up sometimes. Sometimes you will not understand. Sometimes you will stumble upon some grumpy people who will not be that eager to speak to you. Case in point, for example, I stumbled upon a very morcos, in Hungarian means grumpy lady. I had to ask some train tickets. Those episodes will stay with you, but they will also remind you that, the path is riddled with some hurdles that are necessary. The obstacle is the way, as Ryan Holiday would put it. So you build confidence by getting out there and living, but there are, as Till is probably going to show us now, strategic ways to go about it step by step without, venturing out there and charging and going to and living in country and speaking with everybody just by building this confidence. In most cases, it does not work and can even backfire.
Spanish speaking abilities skyrocket when I'm drunk. And that's not just my booze-altered perception, others confirm it too. Like many introverts, I become more outgoing and confident in everything, including speaking Spanish. It's not that alcohol magically improves your Spanish or your language skills in general. It's just that it reduces or removes the anxiety and self-consciousness that's holding you back.
That's absolutely true. If you think about it, what happens is that when you are tipsy, you're not self-conscious anymore. This has happened to me a number of times. I don't drink anymore. I'm very happy that I stopped drinking alcohol. And I'm not telling you that you should drink alcohol to get unstuck and start speaking. I'm just saying that when you drink alcohol, it just shows you that when your inhibitions go down, you just are in the moment and you're present and you focus on communication because you're having a great time, because alcohol works on your brain so that you're not inhibited anymore. So that goes to show that given a certain level of language skills, you can speak really well, you can communicate really well in a situation and maybe poorly in another, depending on a number of factors. But I think one of the most important factors is actually in your brain.
Babies are not conscious about their blabbering. They don't care at all. So the question becomes, how can we create this same confidence in, let's say, a more sustainable way? Let's start with something that to some of you may sound a little weird, but honestly, if it sounds weird to you, maybe you are weird. The idea is to talk to yourself. What I mean is narrating your day in your target language. What are you doing? What are you thinking about? What's your opinion on that show you just watched? This might feel strange at first, but think about it. It's actually the perfect low-pressure environment. No one's listening, as long as you live alone. No one's judging, and you can focus entirely on expressing your thoughts without any anxiety. This kind of self-talk can get boring quite quickly if you do the same things every day and so talk about the same things non-stop. So here's what...
Okay, before we continue, I just wanted to say I've been doing this for years and years, as long as I can remember, but in a more systematic way recently. And I remember, this is a funny episode, when I was learning Mandarin Chinese. I started, I think, in 2008. After a year and a half, I could speak. Not that well, but I could speak. And I remember that I was sitting, when we had lunch with my father and my family, I was talking to myself. I was pretending to speak with my father in Chinese. My father did not like it at all, of course, because he was telling me, what in God's name are you doing? But, I could have talked to my cat, which is a good example of, you can talk to everything, right? Everything and anyone is, because you're talking to yourself. I was inflicting that upon my parents, unfortunately, especially my father, who didn't appreciate that at all. But I was speaking this way. I was speaking Mandarin Chinese every day, maybe 5 minutes. And then I kept talking to myself on and on during the day. And then I kept doing that for other languages. And going back even earlier in time, I still remember when I started learning English, I was doing that all the time. I watched movies and then I was reciting the lines of actors, and the same thing with French. I think it's a very powerful thing if you enjoy it. Recently, I do it in a much more structured way with small notebooks and I organize things. But the bottom line is that if you enjoy self-talk, it's a great way of improving your language skills, provided that you know how to do it, because indeed it can get boring if you don't know how to do it.
You can do instead. After watching a show or a video on YouTube or reading a chapter of a book, discuss it with yourself. What did you think about it? Why did that character make that decision? What do you think will happen next? This way you're practicing more complex thoughts and opinions, instead of just saying, I ate breakfast every day. But
Yeah, this is a very simple and great way to bridge input with output. You watch something interesting and you pretend that you're talking to a friend. You're telling me, I watched a very interesting YouTube video, or you're telling a very interesting story. And it's a perfect excuse, because this way you remove the friction of thinking about what to think. You just say, okay, I've just read this book or watched this podcast or listened to this podcast, watch this video. This is very interesting stuff. Let me tell my imaginary friend about what this is all about.
Talk is just one tool in our arsenal. Let's look at some other strategies that can help bridge this gap. Another powerful strategy is reading out loud. This might sound too simple, but it's actually great for several reasons. First, you're practicing pronunciation and kind of develop muscle memory for speaking without the pressure of coming up with what to say. Second, because of that, you're developing a real feel for the natural flow and rhythm of the language in isolation. And third, you're vocalizing grammar patterns in action without having to construct them yourself.
I think these are all great benefits of reading. I do this more at the beginning when I start learning a language, and for the first, let's say, 3 to 6 months. But what I do at the beginning is I make sure that first and foremost, I always listen and read and listen, because if you start reading too much and you don't listen or that much, then when you start subvocalizing, for example, you can, I'm not saying that this is going to happen, but you can develop bad pronunciation patterns.
Even subvocalization, so just reading in general with your inner voice, gets you closer to output.
Yeah, this is another point he's touching. He was talking about subvocalizing. I think it's a good exercise once you have a B1 level, at least. At the beginning, just reading out loud is not something I would recommend. I would just rather focus on listening and reading, and then you can start reading out loud. Or you should do those things in conjunction.
This in more detail in my video about extensive reading. What's even more useful though is writing. You should write to learn how to speak. Writing makes you very aware of what you know and what you don't know. It's less spontaneous, but therefore more reflective. You'll spot your problematic areas very easily. I actually made this point before in a completely different context. One of the main reasons I make YouTube videos is that I have to explain something that I think I know. But when I start writing the script and realize I can't really explain it, well, I guess I don't understand it that well after all. Writing exposes these knowledge gaps and gives me the opportunity to do some research on them.
Yeah, this is an excellent point. I think one of the best ways to learn things is to teach them, and in the context of language learning, writing exposes your gaps immediately. When you start writing, you immediately see the words you don't know, the expressions you don't know, like how maybe you try to express yourself in certain ways and you can't. So writing is a great exercise. The only thing is that it requires a little bit of energy and planning.
And now with tools like ChatGPT, writing becomes even more powerful. You can keep a record of what you wrote, hand all of that to ChatGPT and ask it to identify recurring errors or misunderstandings. It can tell you pretty clearly where your weaknesses are.
Yeah, this is amazing. It's a revolution. It's a game changer, because nowadays you don't even have a tutor. Before you had to submit, a dissertation or a text. Nowadays you have ChatGPT that can tell you exactly where your gaps are. It can give you suggestions. It can tell you, give you pointers on how to improve the structure, etc. So you have an assistant 24 hours a day. And if you want to improve your writing skills, you can definitely start doing that every single day. A little bit, you get feedback. And one piece of advice would be to implement that feedback in order to improve your writing. So you write something, you get feedback, maybe about the structure and about the grammar and about the vocabulary, and then you implement that to write the same text the following day. This is a very strong and powerful and efficient exercise. But of course, it requires a little bit of planning and it requires a little bit of energy, like everything worth doing.
If writing a diary or text about the latest TV episode you watched has too much of a barrier to get going with, you can also start much smaller by naturally placing output in and throughout your day. Write your shopping lists, to-do lists, or quick notes in your target language. If you read something interesting, write a few sentences as a summary afterwards. The vocabulary.
Yeah, this is another excellent point. Start small. I always recommend all my students of the Academy and my private students, when you want to do something, start small. Because if you jump the gun and try to do things that are too complex, your brain is going to say, whoa, wait a second, hold the phone. This is too difficult. It requires too much energy. So when you start small, you always have the time then to scale up,
Still fresh in your mind so you can apply it directly. If you don't feel like writing or talking, try this new concept called thinking. I always listen to Spanish podcasts while running, but my mind tends to wander off and I start thinking about other things. What's interesting is that these thoughts often naturally form in Spanish, even when I was at a quite beginner level. They weren't grammatically perfect and had some English mixed in, but it was a form of output without opening my mouth. You can also force yourself into this thinking mode, if you need to be reminded that thinking is a good idea.
Yeah, I think this is also a good idea. I do this not very often, but I do this on and off depending on the language. But once again, it's another activity that you can add to your arsenal of meaningful activities to start thinking and then speaking in your target language.
Set 3 reminders throughout your day that prompt you to think in your target language for a few minutes. Sure, you will switch up to your native language quite quickly, but these small little exercises really add up. This natural
Yes, this is another important thing, the compound effect. If you start doing meaningful things a little bit every day, you start thinking in your target language for 2 minutes, you start speaking it for 5 minutes to yourself, you start writing a couple of things first thing in the morning, then these things add up with time, even if it's only 5 minutes a day. The most important thing, again, is to do it every single day, because if you do that, you're telling your brain, this target language that I'm learning is important.
Tendency to think in your target language becomes stronger the more input you get. I was literally dreaming in gibberish Spanish very early on when I was getting 3 hours of input every day.
Yeah, this is a very good sign. I have this, especially when I start reading a lot. When I read a lot in a foreign language, then the following day I have all these words floating in my head, and this is because the brain processes the information at night and transfers the information from the hippocampus to the cortex, the long-term memory.
It depends on the topic, but, and this may come as a surprise to you, I think and write way more often in English than in my native German. I even used to make the same videos in both languages and wrote all my scripts in English first and then translated them to German, not the other way around. And the reason is simple. I consume way more English content, I'm rarely in Germany, and I don't speak German with my girlfriend. So over the last 8 years or so, English has just naturally taken over large parts of my life. And it wasn't forced, it just naturally developed in that way.
This is exactly what has been happening to me when it comes to English. I use English all the time to make these videos, to work with my colleagues, to write, to write articles, to write my journal, to express myself, to write to my friends. So I think English has taken over my life. Sometimes I mix it up with Italian, or better, when I speak Italian, English always comes to the fore, especially when I talk about language learning. And within certain fields, I think I express myself more concisely and better in English rather than in Italian. And this goes to show that no matter whether you're speaking your foreign language or your native language, the most important thing is use a meaningful use of that. If you use that language all the time, if there's one language you use all the time, it will be the most prominent, dominant language in your brain, because the brain gets better. The more you use something, the better the brain gets at handling that something.
Came from input and then transitioned to output. This brings us to an important point about speaking. This is controversial, but according to the input-focused linguists like Stephen Krashen, it's not even really a way to learn the language.
And this may come as a bit of a surprise to some of you. Certainly came as a surprise to me. Talking is not practicing. Talking is not practicing.
And here it makes sense.
I disagree with this, because I think that by speaking, you can, for example, discover gaps, you can get feedback, and then when you engage in a conversation, you learn a lot because you're listening to the other person. So maybe 50% of the time, unless you speak a lot. So unless Stephen Krashen is talking about talking to yourself, but even then you can learn things. It is a form of practice. Actually, speaking language is the ultimate form of practice. It's not the only one, but it's a powerful form of practice if you know what to say, the environment in which you're going to operate, in which you're going to say these things, possibly low anxiety. And if you have your speaking, whether you're speaking with AI to yourself or with a great tutor, then if you get feedback and you implement that feedback, that is actually a great way of learning and improving your language skills. So I disagree with this wholeheartedly.
To look back to the knowledge versus skill distinction. Speaking is applying what you've already learned through input. That said, speaking early can serve one important purpose, and that is to keep you motivated. If your goal is to speak to native people in their language, don't wait 2 years before opening your mouth. However, if you don't feel ready yet, stick to more controlled environments, like language. language exchange apps where people expect beginners, ChatGPT's advanced voice mode, I made a whole video on this, language tutors who are trained to work with your level, language learning discords where everyone's learning, even though there you will be exposed to lots of incorrect input, maybe not ideal, or you use Langia's writing system, which lets you practice output with instant feedback and no judgment, and allows you to turn passive vocabulary into active one through flashcards from your own context. The good part is...
Okay, I think that this motivation thing is a big thing. Let me tell you why. For example, with Serbian, which is a language very similar to Polish and Russian, though I speak these two languages well, I got tired of input after a year and a half. I found it repetitive, and I started getting demotivated or unmotivated to learn the language. And then I hopped on a conversation with a native speaker that got me a lot of motivation. So input is great, but I think that ultimately my goal is to speak the language confidently and fluently. And of course, speaking it is really important. So that's a very important point, but you also have to consider speak whenever you feel ready. So there's a trade-off between, okay, do I feel ready? Do I feel comfortable? And when has the moment come for me to start using this language in a meaningful way, speaking with native speakers? It's completely up to you.
You will naturally feel ready for more output as your input increases. You might notice yourself having thoughts in the language or even dreams. These are good signs that you're ready to start expressing yourself more. If you want to make your speaking skills a priority, build habits and make it non-negotiable. Some people go to football practice at 7 p.m. every Tuesday and Thursday. You can do the same with, for example, your italki speaking practice at these times. Don't rely on, let's see when I have time. Block it in your calendar.
Yeah, exactly. Once it's in your calendar, it's probably going to happen. If it's not in your calendar, it's unlikely to happen. This is my thinking.
I personally don't do that because it sounds like an absolute nightmare to me. But that's the beauty of the different strategies.
That's exactly right. We're all different. I put everything on my calendar. If you look at my calendar, you're going to think I'm a madman. For Till, maybe this would be a nightmare. But again, everybody is different.
And pick what works for you. There is no one-size-fits-all approach. Whether you're an introvert who prefers writing first or an extrovert who learns best by immediately jumping into conversation. As always, the most effective method is the one you actually follow.
That's beautiful. The most effective method is the one you actually follow. It encompasses all that is good about Till's videos, and that is it's a personal road. Language learning is a personal road. You have to follow the method that you like. You have to adapt your method. You have to tweak things. You have to experiment. And once you find something that works for you, be it writing a journal, speaking to yourself, speaking with a tutor, speaking with AI, activating a language in your unique and creative ways, then bingo. That is going to make a huge difference in the short as well as in the long term. All right. So what do I think about the whole thing? Honestly, I make reaction videos to Till's work, with his permission, of course, because he has this rare ability to break down why something feels hard and then give you real practical tools to move forward. This was not just theory, it was a wake-up call, especially for those of us stuck in that frustrating I understand but cannot speak phase. If there is one thing I want you to take away from this video, it's this. Passive understanding is not the end goal, it's just the beginning. To speak fluently, you need to build active pathways, and that takes courage, practice, and a system that works for you. It doesn't have to be perfect, it just has to be consistent. Talk to yourself. Talk to AI or a tutor. Shadow a podcast. Summarize what you've heard. Record yourself and listen back. Whatever you choose, do it daily. Even 5 to 10 minutes a day can completely transform your speaking confidence over time. And if Till's message resonated with you and you're ready to bridge the gap between understanding and speaking, here are 2 things I highly recommend. First, grab my free guide, 3 simple steps to maximize your conversations with AI. It's a practical blueprint to help you speak more, practice smart, and turn comprehension into communication using the incredible tools we now have at our fingertips. Click the pinned comment or check the description box. It's completely free. Second, check out Languia, the platform Till created. I use it, I love it, and yes, it's an affiliate link, which means that if you try it, you're also supporting this channel. Win-win. And one last thing, if you enjoyed this reaction, do not miss my other video where I dive into another of Till's gems, and this one is all about how to read more effectively in a foreign language. You will find it linked somewhere around here. Definitely worth a watch. That's it for now, lovely people. Thanks so much for being here. Happy language learning, and as always, see you in the next video.